All right, good afternoon, everyone. Just a sound check. Can everyone hear me all right? Great. Good afternoon. My name is Mike Serra. I'm the Executive Director of the New Jersey League of Municipalities. I welcome you to this briefing on the American Rescue Plan. Some of you may have just joined us following a press event in Elizabeth featuring Governor Murphy, Senators Menendez and Booker, as well as League President Mayor Janice Kovach of Clintontown, League Past President Chris Bowich of Elizabeth, and the Union Mayor Michelle Delasort, among others. So, and their discussion was, as is ours, on the American Rescue Plan. Paul Pena, our legislative analyst, is going to walk you through some of the major provisions of the bill. Let me do a few housekeeping notices. We have a large audience. We're already at 150. I'm expecting maybe another 100 to join. Please put your questions in the chat box if you can. Please keep yourself muted so everyone can hear. We probably will, there'll probably be several questions that we cannot answer yet because it's going to be depending on regulations and rules yet to be developed by the Federal Treasury. So we will be preparing an FAQ based on the comments that we hear today and other issues that we will publish. This session is being recorded. It will also be posted as a reference on our website. The FAQ will be recorded, as will the slide deck that we're presenting to you will be available on our website. And just if I may do another commercial, if you notice, we've begun to do some of these regularly. The week before last, we did a legislative briefing on the new cannabis legalization bill in New Jersey. We are going to be doing an update on that. So if you missed the first one and more information, I believe Lori, if I can confirm that, have we confirmed Thursday, next Thursday at 12 noon?
We have.
We have. So next Thursday at 12 noon, information on how to register for that free webinar will be pushed out to you all shortly. So with that, I am going to turn it over. I'm going to launch our PowerPoint. If you bear with me for one moment with a screen share. And Paul, if you'd like to take it away.
Thank you, Mike, and good afternoon, everyone. So thank you for joining us for this American Rescue Plan briefing by the New Jersey League of Municipalities. My contact information is there on the screen. I look forward to giving you this broad overview of the program and then answering questions as best as we can once we are finished. So Mike, if you want to start with the next slide, please. So the American Rescue Plan is a $1.9 trillion package that was signed yesterday by President Biden, and it's designed to facilitate the recovery from the economic and health effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is in addition to the $2.2 trillion CARES Act, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act that was passed a year ago, and the $900 billion pandemic relief bill passed this past December. So, next slide, Mike. There is a lot in this this law. Back up one, Mike. You went one too fast. So, I'm sorry. Next one, please. There we go. So. This law that was signed yesterday was 628 pages, and the major components of the American Rescue Plan include direct payments to working families and expanded child tax credits. That includes $1,400 in direct payments to individuals making less than $75,000 annually and couples making combined $150,000. Adult dependents are eligible for these direct payments, and there are major increases in the child tax credit to $3,600 for children under the age of 6 and $3,000 for children under 18, which benefits more than 500,000 New Jerseyans, as well as a tripling of the earned income tax credit to $1,500, benefiting 350,000 New Jerseyans. Both programs have increased eligibility, and the child tax credit is refundable for lower income working parents. Next, aggressive action to speed up COVID-19 vaccines and contain the virus. There's $14 billion for vaccines, $49 billion for testing, contact tracing, genomic sequencing to track new variants and monitoring of COVID-19, as well as $7.6 billion to hire 100,000 public health workers to administer vaccines and support the pandemic response. Providing the resources needed to allow schools to safely reopen includes $128 billion to safely reopen K-12 schools, upgrade ventilation systems in schools, reduce class sizes, implement social distancing, purchase personal protective equipment, and hire more staff to avoid layoffs. There is $39 billion for higher education, with at least half of that total going towards financial aid for students. Another $7 billion to help provide for internet connectivity, $1 billion for Head Start, and an expansion of childcare and dependent block grant programs to help childcare providers, to help struggling families help pay the cost of childcare. Next is immediate economic relief for Americans hit hardest. There's a federal extension of $300 of weekly federal unemployment benefits through September 6th. That's on top of the amount that the state issues. The first $10,200 of this amount is tax-free for individuals who earn up to $150,000. And there's an expansion of eligibility for freelancers, gig workers, and independent contractors in this legislation. And lastly, and the reason that we are here today, this legislation, this law includes support for struggling communities, including $50 billion for FEMA disaster relief funds at 100% cost share. And with that, Mike, would you switch to the next slide, please? So state and local funding in the American Rescue Plan. Included in this new law is $350 billion in new federal fiscal assistance for states, territories, tribes, counties, and every municipality. There is a new $10 billion coronavirus capital projects fund, which we'll talk a little bit about. Local governments will receive $130.2 billion split evenly between municipalities and counties. And New Jersey is expected to receive $9.3 billion, approximately $6.4 billion for the state, and $2.9 billion for municipalities and counties. Next slide, please, Mike. So there are a couple of different distribution and guidelines for the American Rescue Plan, state and local aid. Municipalities that have a population over 50,000 50,000 people will receive their federal aid directly from the U.S. Treasury. Municipalities with a population of less than 50,000, the U.S. Treasury will send that money to the state within 60 days, and then the state has 30 days to distribute that money in the allotted amount directly to the individual municipalities. The formula in this law for the for the aid is a modified community development block grant formula that takes into account population, unemployment, and housing insecurity. And that's how the individual numbers that some of you have received, that's how that number was calculated. So any amount that's not distributed to non-entitlement municipalities, which are municipalities with less than 50,000 residents, will be returned to the U.S. Treasury. Presumably, the U.S. Treasury will create some mechanism to ensure that smaller municipalities receive that money if there is an issue with the state government, although we don't expect in New Jersey, given the governor's support of this program, that there will be any issues from this. And in the event that there would be, if the state fails to distribute the funds to local entities, the penalty comes from the state portion of the state and local coronavirus fund. The amount per jurisdiction may not exceed 75% of the most recent budget as of January 27th, 2020. So as an example, if your municipal budget was $100 million and you received $80 million in aid, and those are illustrative numbers, you would have to return $5 million of that. And that is largely a formula that affects very small municipalities and counties outside of New Jersey based on New Jersey budget numbers and the amount of aid that is scheduled to be received. It doesn't appear that this provision affects any New Jersey municipalities. The funding will be distributed in two tranches. The first will be immediately, and by immediately, for those larger communities, published reports have that that the Treasury will begin issuing it within the next few weeks. And for those communities with less than 50,000 residents, you can expect it within the next 90 days or so. So Mike, next slide, please. So the permitted uses of the American Rescue Plan state and local aid is outlined as followed. So it's to respond to the public health emergency with respect to COVID-19 or its negative economic impacts, including assistance to households, small businesses, and nonprofits, or aid to impacted industries such as tourism, travel, and hospitality. This is similar to the CARES Act money that several municipalities received and then distributed to different nonprofits and social service providers in their communities. It's going to be similar in that regard. For the provision of government services, to the extent of the reduction in revenue due to the public health emergency, make necessary investments in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. And then lastly, states and local governments are allowed to transfer aid to a private nonprofit organization, a public benefit corporation involved in the transportation of passengers or cargo, or a special purpose unit of state or local government. So, Mike, the next slide, please. There are some limitations, however, on the state and local aid. The American Rescue Plan outlines that funds may not be used to directly or indirectly utilize these funds to offset a reduction in net tax revenue, and the penalty for doing so will require repayment to the Treasury. So you can't reduce the amount you tax and then just use this aid in place of it. And then lastly, no funds can be deposited in pension funds. This likely is specific to states, but I would imagine that when Treasury comes out, the US Treasury comes out with guidance, the spirit of the law is that it would also apply to municipalities and counties as well. Next slide, please, Mike. There are going to be reporting requirements. Local governments would be required to provide periodic reports providing a detailed accounting of the use of the funds. And I would especially expect that Treasury will provide some guidance in how this is going to happen. And if a municipality fails to comply with any provisions of this bill, they will be required to repay the Treasury an equal amount to the funds in violation. And then lastly, all funds that are distributed as aid must be used no later than December 31st, 2024. So this is actually very helpful because the original CARES Act had a deadline of the end of 2020, which was ultimately extended, but this allows communities to plan for the use of this aid. So next slide, please, Mike. The Coronavirus Capital Project Fund. This is $10 billion separate and apart from the direct aid that each municipality will receive for states, territories, and tribal governments to carry out critical capital projects specifically related to enabling work, education, and health monitoring, including remote options in response to the COVID-19 public health emergency. So those are a lot of words that basically says the federal government wants to use this money for broadband expansion and improvement in communities. Each state will receive a minimum allocation of $100 million as a minimum, with the remaining funds allocated based on a formula including population, individuals in rural areas, and households living below the poverty line. We presume that the state will announce guidelines for allocation of these funds once it's received and they've had the ability to stand this program up. So Mike, next, please. There is, as I referenced at the top of this, this 628-page law has a lot of different programs in it. And there are, just to note, a few that are important to municipalities. There's housing assistance, $27 billion for emergency rental assistance, $10 billion for homeowners assistance, for nearly $5 billion for state and local governments to combat homelessness. Food security extends the SNAP maximum benefit by 15% through September, adds $1.1 billion to states to address increased caseload in SNAP and WIC programs, $800 million for increased WIC benefits, and $37 million for commodity supplemental food program for low-income Americans over 60 years of age. And then childcare and early learning, $35 billion for childcare in a developmental block grant for childcare providers. So Mike, next slide, please. The Pandemic Emergency Fund, it's $1 billion to states to provide emergency assistance to low-income families with children, an expansion of the Paycheck Protection Program with an additional $7.25 billion, and an expansion of eligibility. And this is also a second wave. So for residents in your communities that have received money through the Paycheck Protection Program, they are still eligible to apply again. And lastly on this slide, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, $28 billion with $5 billion set aside for smaller establishments with less than $500,000 in 2019 revenue. And when the program stands up, there will be a priority for the first 3 weeks for applications from restaurants owned by women, veterans, or socially and economically disadvantaged areas. So next slide, please, Mike. There is transit and airport funding, $30 billion for transit agencies, $8 billion for airports. And in New Jersey, that includes $164 million for Newark Liberty International Airport, $6 million for Atlantic City International Airport, $5 million for Trenton Mercer Airport, and $854,000 combined for the New Jersey General Aviation Airports. There's funding to address mental health disparities and expand behavioral and mental health services, $7.6 billion for COVID-19 response at community health centers, $1.5 billion for substance abuse prevention and treatment block grant programs, and $1.5 billion for community mental health block programs. An expansion of $4.5 billion for the low-income home energy assistance program, and a $500 million new water assistance program modeled on LIHEAP to help low-income residents pay water bills. Next slide, please, Mike. So I know we've thrown a lot at you in the last 15 or so minutes. As with complicated legislation that funds multiple programs, there are going to be a lot of questions and more questions than answers at the forefront. But as Mike noted at the beginning, we're recording this presentation and it will be posted on our website, and we'll prepare an FAQ. And obviously, it goes without saying, as we learn of the different parameters of the individual programs from the federal government, we will share them in our daily updates and our weekly briefers, as well as on our website. So you should stay tuned and make sure you check out all of those items for updates. And with that, I am happy to answer questions. This is the full legislative team here, and feel free to reach out to us with any questions.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Yes, as you know, the league is your eyes and ears here in Trenton, and obviously we work closely with our partners at the National League of Cities, who took a leading role in advocating for the American Rescue Plan. So don't hesitate to contact us on this or any other issue. We certainly will be dealing with this in further guidance as it develops. You'll likely see written guidance from us via email and our membership alerts and our magazine. This will likely be a subject at the league conference in November, which we do expect to hold in person in Atlantic City. If we can do barbecues for the 4th of July, I think we can do a conference in November as well. So there's a lot more that will be coming out about it. I know Lori Buckaloo has been monitoring the chat for some questions. And so Lori, as I'll take down the PowerPoint now. This will also be available online for folks. Lori, can we start going through some questions?
Certainly. And I see Hemet's iPhone with their hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we have a parking authority in town that entirely depends on parking at the train station. And if they had even 5 cars in the train station, that was a day to party. So is there any way for them to apply for this funding?
So in the initial guidance that's been provided, the short answer is I don't know. There is a lot of money for transit, and whether that will apply to the parking authorities that near transit, I'm not sure, but we will make a note of it. And as more guidance comes out, we'll do our best to keep you informed.
Oh, okay. I mean, I'll really appreciate that because they are entirely dependent on the train station. So
Certainly.
they are in a big mess.
Yeah, it's I wish I could tell you that your situation was unique in that regard.
No, I fully understand. It's not. I just am raising awareness because they keep asking me, and unfortunately, the township is also in equal trouble. So the township doesn't have ability to help them much. So I'm hoping some of this funding will be directed to people who are badly affected by pandemic, and at least another 6 months, I don't see them getting more parking.
Thank you. And remind me, what municipality was this? I
This
missed
is
that.
in West Windsor, and the
Okay.
train station is Princeton Junction.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Paul, we have a question from Kevin Saluka. One of the large unknowns resulting from COVID-19 at this time may be future successful commercial tax appeals. Has there been any guidance or talk about the funds being used for such successful tax appeals?
There has not at this point, but the law does permit for lost revenue, and I think that everyone in the building here at the league and all of our municipal officials could successfully make the argument that a tax appeal is a result of lost revenue and would likely sustain in a permitted use based on an initial reading of the law.
And the next question we have is from Teresa Gilbreath. Congressperson Geitheimer indicated the money could be used for revenue replacement when the loss was directly a result of COVID. Can you speak to that?
That is correct. The law does speak to that. Now so if you have, it's based on the January 2020 budgeted numbers. So if you can demonstrate a revenue loss based on taxes, then you can use the aid as a replacement in your. You can use the aid as a replacement in this as lost revenue.
The next one's from Raymond Murray. Will DCA allow the stated municipal funding to be anticipated as federal grant in this year's budget? We don't know at this point in time, but we will reach out and have a conversation with local government services and report that back in one of our briefings to folks. Michael Rogers questions ask that if we clarify what is prohibited use means under the law.
So the prohibited use is specifically what the Congress does not allow you to do in this is utilize the aid that you receive for a pension payment, number one, but then number two, you can't use it to cut taxes. You can't, this needs to be utilized for either lost revenue or new projects. So, broadly speaking, if you wanted to take the money and fix all of the sewers in your town or all the sidewalks in your town, that is likely going to be permissible. However, if you normally you can't reduce the amount that you tax on an annual basis and just fill in the aid that you were given without demonstrating a loss of revenue due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you. Andrew from Roselle Park is asking, regarding municipalities under 50,000 in population, when should we anticipate the 90-day clock to start? We understand that this is not an exact science.
So the president signed the legislation yesterday. Our understanding is that the U.S. Treasury has been working with the Congress to stand up this program. So assuming that the 60-day clock starts, let's say it starts Monday, that is March 15th. They need to get it to the states by the middle of June. The state, assuming it does not apply for an extension, has 30 days. So for those non-entitlement municipalities under 50,000 residents, I would expect by the middle of July that you would expect this first tranche of money.
Okay. And then Bob is asking, will we be able to use these funds to pay down a deferred charge for revenue deficit that was passed last year? that might need further guidance from DLGS on that one.
Yeah,
And we will
that,
get-
I was going to say, so I agree with that, Lori. I think that there might be a case to be made that it's, that it's lost revenue under the provisions as outlined in this new law. But I think that, the state is going to have a lot to say about, what guidance they receive from the federal government on this, and will advise appropriately.
Dave Searcy, will these funds be available to use to offset COVID emergency deferred charges to be raised if you took advantage of that? And again, I think this is a question we will follow up with Division of Local Government Services and report back. Bob Law is asking, can these funds be budgeted in our 2021 municipal budgets? Any guidance on this, or will that be forthcoming from local Division of Local Government Services finance notice? Again, that's a conversation we need to have with the division. We'll report back how the money should be anticipated in your budget. W. Antonese, is there any way we can get how the allocations were calculated?
The short answer is I don't know, and I don't. We have made inquiries specifically into this, and other than giving us broad guidance, as I've outlined in terms of population, unemployment, and housing insecurity, and I have not gotten percentages as to how it was all applied, but we will continue to ask, and if we learn it, we will pass it along.
Okay. Colleen Lapp is asking, so if we reduced anticipated revenue for the 2020 budget, we cannot recoup those funds? I thought we were able to look back at revenues from our last quote normal year 2019.
That is correct. That is correct. So it's the January 2020 budget was the last time, what the benchmark as the last normal budget. So going back a year from there.
Okay. James Solomon is asking, how much money will school districts receive? What restrictions are placed on their use of funds? Will they receive money above and beyond assistance with reopening?
So I have not seen a breakdown for school districts similar to what we have seen for municipalities. So I can't speak to that specifically. And then Lori, what was the second part of the question?
Will they receive money above and beyond assistance with reopening?
So there are a number of different programs within the education section of this law. In addition to the $128 billion to reopen and do work on the schools, there is there's $7 billion for internet connectivity, $1 billion for Head Start, and let's see, there is there is money to address learning loss, reserve money for reserved summer enrichment, and money reserved for after-school programs. And I'm happy to follow up offline if anyone has questions specific to that. It's we included a lot of information in the presentation, and we could have spent 3 hours outlining every single program that's in this bill. So I'm happy to have a discussion offline. And I should say, for those of you on this call, on the Zoom call that has not heard what your estimated amount from the federal government is going to be in aid, please reach out to me offline. We have received estimates and we're happy to share with you.
Great. The next question comes from Chris and Tony Parlow. Can you go over one more time how the allocations received by each municipality was made? Can that amount be appealed?
It was a modified community development block grant formula that includes population, rate of unemployment, and level of housing insecurity. I have not seen any appeals process, nor I have not seen an application for appeals process throughout that, but we can look into it. But it's, this is all new fiscal assistance. And I think that, I'm not certain that an appeal to the federal government for more would be advantageous, in my opinion.
Lizette Aquatella is asking, to provide employees with safe working environments, can funding be used for building upgrades on ventilation, filtration, either renovation or new construction?
So I would expect so, and specifically in the, the intent of the state and local aid was to deal with issues surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. So I would expect so, but I also expect that the U.S. Treasury and the state, the State Department of Community Affairs will provide some further guidance. But, it sounds like infrastructure to me, to be perfectly honest.
Chris McCullis, I apologize if I'm butchering last names. Can the funds be used for utility parking that lost revenue in 2020, slightly different than the prior example of the parking authority?
I think we're going to need further guidance, and I guess it would depend on the relationship between the authority and the municipality. In theory, the municipality, there is that provision that allows the municipality to distribute some of these funds to private, nonprofit, public benefit corporations, and assuming that that qualifies, it would be permissible.
Okay. Ken Blum is asking if the state would push back the introduction date until we know how we can use the loss of revenues in the budget. Can that be an issue we'll bring up with DLGS and let everyone know? Rich is asking, are soft costs such as engineering including as permissible costs for infrastructure projects, or only hard costs?
So in the legislation and the briefings that I've seen, it doesn't spell out specifically one versus the other. So we'll seek guidance on that and let you know.
Okay. Franklin Brown is asking, counties are also receiving direct funding, and I understand that they may also have allocations for their municipalities. Is this additional funding that we can anticipate? If so, are there any direction on the use of this funding?
So that is correct. The counties are also receiving funds through the American Rescue Plan. They're subject to the same guidelines that we've outlined here today. So if an individual county chooses to transmit additional funds to a municipality, that would be their decision. And we have not had any conversations as of yet, nor have I heard of any counties publicly announced that that is part of their plan.
Okay. And we have a follow-up question from Teresa Gilbreth regarding revenue replacement. 2 examples. 1, our municipal pool did not open, therefore we did not receive the revenue. 2, our municipal lot did not have commuters parking in our lot. These are not related to our taxes, but other revenues. Would these kinds of losses qualify?
So, I think that, the goal of the Congress in drafting this legislation what they learned from the CARES Act was that there were significant strings attached to that money that made it difficult to utilize in a lot of cases. And the goal of the American Rescue Plan was to provide direct and flexible use of this aid. So, specific to this question and the previous questions, my gut instinct is that they're going, that the Treasury is going to look favorably on it, but I can't speak specifically to one versus the other. There are rules that Treasury will have to write that is not in the actual legislation that passed. So, my gut instinct is probably, but I can't speak specifically and give you a definitive yes today.
Okay. And then Raymond Murray is asking, will FEMA funds be available to cover costs not covered by CARES money, either over the awarded amount or expended after the CARES deadline?
So this new law does provide $50 billion in new FEMA disaster relief funds at 100% cost share. So the short answer is it's possible.
And Paul Harris has his hand raised.
Yeah, I had a quick question. Do we believe that there'd be any restrictions on hazard pay and or settling of collective bargaining agreements? Thank you.
So in terms of hazard pay, if in terms of hazard pay, I think that if it is part of dealing with the pandemic, then it would most likely be a permissible use. And Paul, the second part of your question had to do with collective bargaining. Is that correct?
Correct.
So I'm not certain. Are you talking about in addition to the agreement or an addendum that was made to a collective bargaining agreement, and whether it would be, you could use this to fund that?
Correct. If during the process, because you have.
So as I previously stated, I think that the Treasury, in keeping with the spirit of what the Congress wants, is going to allow for some flexibility here, and our hope would be that it would be permissible, and as we learn more, we will continue to share with everyone.
Greg Bonin is asking, can you elaborate on the timing of receiving of funds? And then how do we account for this in our budgets?
So for entitlement communities, so communities with a population above 50,000 residents, the money will come directly from the Treasury, and published reports indicate that that's going to happen within the next few weeks to 30 days or so. For non-entitlement communities with less than 50,000 residents, the money will be transmitted to the states, and then the state within 60 days. And then the state has 30 days to distribute that money to the individual communities in the full amount. So by the middle of June, it would be expected that the first tranche of money would be received by the municipalities.
And then Greg, for how you account for this in your budgets, we will follow up with the group based on our conversations with local government services.
Thank you, Lori.
On the G. Motter, can funds be used for lost revenue from a swimming pool utility?
So I think similar to the previous questions, we'll need to receive guidance from the U.S. Treasury on this. But within the permitted uses, if it's if your pool is part of a municipal authority, local governments are allowed to transfer to private nonprofits, public benefit corporations. So presumably, if they stay within the spirit of what Congress wants, it likely would be permissible.
And then Council President Mary Ricetto is saying, many of us are trying to introduce budgets. Are you suggesting we hold off until we hear from you? We're going to have the conversations with local government services. I suggest you speak with your finance officer to see what your local community needs are. We're hoping to have the conversation sooner than later with the Division of Local Government Services and be able to push out information to the group. And Hermet's hands up again, but I don't know if that's left over from the initial question.
Oh, that's left over from initial question. Sorry, I'm still.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
Jessica,
lower. It's lowered now. Thanks.
Jessica asked, could these funds be used to update a phone system so that employees would be able to safely work remotely?
Presumably, yes. I mean, that would fall under the response to the public health emergency, including assistance to government, small businesses, and nonprofits. So presumably, yes. One other thing I would like to say that I omitted in my remarks is I really want to thank Senators Menendez and Booker and the members of the Congressional Delegation from New Jersey who have worked tirelessly with us on behalf of municipalities. They have listened to our concerns. They have sometimes pushed back, sometimes have been very willing, but they have been amazing participants and amazing partners with us. And I think that they deserve a public acknowledgement on behalf of the league.
And Marlena Schmidt is asking, can funds be used to offset loss of hotel motel receipts?
So presumably, yes, under the specifics that I have outlined. It's lost revenue that would have been otherwise, in a normal scenario, otherwise recouped.
Ray Cody is asking if the money, can the money be used to prepay existing debt and or used to reduce a pending bond issue?
Ray, we're going to have to get guidance on that. Yeah, I'm not certain. Most of it has been specific to the pandemic. So we'll have to get some guidance and get back to everyone on that.
I think we went through, one just came in.
Paul Harris is asking, do funds have to be completely exhausted by December 31st, 2024? And as in expended, as opposed to encumbered to be spent?
Good question.
In all of the briefings that I read, it said funds must be used no later than December 31st. But we'll see clarity on that because whether spent or encumbered. So we'll see clarity on that and let you know.
Okay. And it looks like we've exhausted all the questions. Did we miss anyone?
Yeah, Mayor Bill Pikaliski. Question on airport funding on general aviation. What amount was available for?
So that was $854,000, and I am dangerously surmising here, but my assumption would be that would likely go to the Department of Transportation, and they will stand up some sort of process for funding at general aviation airports.
That's 854,000?
Correct.
Oh, it's not even, Not even $1 million, okay.
And to be clear, that is 854,000 specific to New Jersey.
Right, okay.
That is not the totality of the program, because it was this was in a information provided by the senators that, in addition to the amounts that I read off for
Right, for
the
targeted,
larger
for,
airports.
yeah, for earmarked airports, yeah.
Correct. So the 854 is specific to New Jersey general aviation airports. That's not the total federal program, which are the numbers, a lot of what I was reading off were, total for the country.
And Frank, you mentioned about future capital projects for water and sewer. Does it have to be, I mean, COVID related? I don't understand. If we want to improve our water system or our sewer system, that will be, I guess.
So infrastructure is listed as one of the permissible uses of the money. So if you wanted to work on your sewer system, that would presumably be a permissible use.
Huh. Okay, and that deals with just not only that, but any improvements, road improvements, drainage improvements, and so forth?
Presumably, yes.
Right, okay.
Right, yeah, I think one more came into the chat
Yes.
box.
Yep, Kevin McMillan is asking, does the loss of interest on investments qualify as a loss of revenue because it is indirectly related to the pandemic?
So that's something we'll have to provide, we'll have to ask and we'll provide guidance on. My instinct, consistent with how this was drafted and the intent of the Congress, is probably, but there are other entities that get a say in this as well.
That seems to be all the questions. Oh, nope, Marlena Schmidt, last question. Can money be used to purchase emergency generator for health departments?
I would suspect yes. I think that would be likely a permissible use.
All right, let's we'll wrap it up with a few closing comments. Again, this is Mike Serra, the Executive Director of the League. I want to thank Paul for his presentation today and his work on this issue, and Lori as well, and the rest of the team. An excellent presentation from Paul. I echo his comments regarding our New Jersey Congressional delegation. It was a big difference between a previous CARES Act and this was the population threshold. And that was a big lift. And we had some champions in DC on that. And so our kudos and thanks to the Congressional delegation for advocating to lifting the population threshold so every municipality received relief. I also want to note the excellent work of our partners in Washington, the National League of Cities and the U.S. Conference of Mayors, who prioritized that very issue and other issues related to municipal relief. Obviously, there are a lot of questions that were asked that we don't know the answers to. We may do another briefing like this down the road. We certainly will be providing you additional guidance, both written and as well as in other forms. This is being recorded. It will be available shortly on our website, along with the slide deck will be available on the website. We have a record of the questions that were asked. We'll be preparing the FAQ. And with that, we're wrapping it up before 1. It's a beautiful day outside. So let's all enjoy good weather for a change. Have a great weekend. And I'll do another commercial. See you at Atlantic City in November. So thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.